yeah.
And it's the first time I've done I'm speaking to real people and I'm looking at a screen, so I don't quite know where to put my eyes. So I get the lovely topic of house of hospitality, which is something that I do like to think about. I did joke when I said I'd do this one that I'd got an old sermon that I could sort of pull out and re-deliver. I couldn't actually find it, so there we go. So I don't know if what I'm saying now is anything similar to what I said before when I've spoken on this. I picked this, I just thought this had a party feel to it, this first screen, which is why I chose that as my backdrop. But as we're looking in this series of what sort of house are we building, how are we going to be a house of hospitality as a church? Oh, am I clicking the wrong way? There we go. Clicking the right way now. So, this was our first opportunity of hospitality extended by our son and daughter-in-law in their new flat. We went there on Friday night. It's quite handy for them because we were taking a car for them to borrow. Yes, and socially distanced as well. They're in a tiny flat, but they've got enough table space that we could be at one end and then at the other. But that was a very nice example of hospitality for us. So, becoming a house of hospitality, what is it? I did a bit of research. This was one definition I came up with. The friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors or strangers. I would like to sort of extend it out. Obviously at the moment when we think of hospitality, what we can do is really very different from what we would normally expect we can do. But let's think about it as welcome and how we welcome others. Actually this morning we've sung a lot about how God welcomes us in. And having been welcomed in by God, how do we then welcome others? How do we know it's important? It's in the Old Testament and the New Testament. When I did some research again, what cultures does hospitality matter in? I can't think of a culture that I've ever heard of where hospitality doesn't matter, actually. African cultures, Indian cultures, Asian cultures, you hear about how people are welcomed. How we treat other people, including those outside our family, matters. I found in India and Nepal, evidently, the principle of hospitality is based around a phrase that means the guest is God. So to me, that makes me think, when we welcome a guest, we're welcoming God. When we welcome someone, we're actually welcoming God. And this was one of the key passages I then went to. Matthew 25, verse 35 to 40. Jesus says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was ill and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you ill or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." So, why should we be hospitable? In the Old Testament, we have a couple of significant stories where the way that history pans out, possibly, is changed by the hospitality given. I'm not sure if I've got this reference. No, I've not got this reference on. In Hebrews 13:2, it says, "Do not forget to give hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." And so we have the story of Abraham in Genesis 18. 3 men appear near Abraham's tent one day, and these were actually the men who brought news of Sarah's pregnancy in her old age. Can you imagine if Abraham had just walked on by or gone, oh, I'm a bit too busy to think about what they're up to? Would he have missed that opportunity to welcome them in and then get the message that they had from God? A similar but more sobering story is the story of Lot, when he showed hospitality to two men who warned him of God's plan to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and encouraged him to escape with his family. So obviously the story of Abraham is one we're very familiar with, and we see how that action led to Abraham's family becoming what God had promised it would be. In the New Testament, we know that hospitality features. And actually, if you look through the stories of Jesus, the times that Jesus eats with people, and even after the resurrection, Jesus appears while the disciples are eating. Hebrews 13, verse 2, that's where I had it. This is the example where it says, some have shown hospitality to strangers. That's not quite right, is it? Have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it, sorry. And also, it's a criteria for church leadership in 1 Timothy 3, verse 2, and in Titus 1, verse 8. We are encouraged that is something that should characterise a leader, to be inviting people in. Connection matters. So why is hospitality important? Because connection matters. If you look at everything that was read and said in the early days of lockdown, what actually mattered most to people, it wasn't that they couldn't go to their workplaces necessarily. It wasn't that they were furloughed and so they didn't have anything to do. It was mainly they couldn't see friends, parents, grandchildren, etc. That connection we have with people really matters. And I think, as we've said, as God welcomes us in, we are naturally inclined to want to be with people, most of us. I know that's maybe not true for all. And let's learn from that to make the most of the opportunities that we have to connect with people, not just our natural family, but people we come across. Jesus is a great example as well. Jesus invited himself to Zacchaeus' house when Zacchaeus was hiding up in the tree. So Zacchaeus didn't have time to get ready. Jesus just said, I'm coming to your house today. And a lovely story right at the end of John's Gospel when Jesus appears on the beach post-resurrection. The disciples have been struggling to catch some fish. So eventually they bring some fish along. But Jesus appears to be on the beach ready for a breakfast barbecue. So they come along, he's got bread and the fish are cooked. Isn't that a lovely picture of Jesus providing for his disciples? And that's what we can do for others. Now, I appreciate there can be some barriers to hospitality. So I wanted to look at a few of those. The first being effort. So last weekend we were having Steve's brother and his wife over for a barbecue. Steve happened to mention it to a colleague at work, and I think he probably said, oh, I'm barbecuing this weekend. And his colleague said, so who's doing the salads? Obviously, barbecuing in our culture and many cultures is a bit of a man thing, isn't it? But even with a barbecue, there's quite a lot of tidying and washing up afterwards. But what is the purpose of the free time that we have? Is it to be looking after ourselves, or is it to be serving others? And 1 Peter 4:9 says, serve without grumbling. And obviously we had family round, it was a lovely time, but it takes a bit of effort. Another factor is hospitality can make us vulnerable. When we invite people in, the state of our house and of our family relationships might become apparent. When we were living in East Oxford, we moved in 1997. And in about 2002, I think, we finally had our kitchen ripped out and a new one put in. It was good timing because we discovered that the joists under the floor were so rotten that the units might have fallen through the floor at some point. But a student who visited us told us that she'd actually thought we were about to have our kitchen done when she first visited, because for probably the first 5 years of living there, we always had plaster peeling off the walls of the kitchen. But actually, God had spoken to me. That was a house that needed a lot of things doing. And God had spoken to me about people rather than projects. And even though we'd got various projects going on at various times, welcoming people in was important. So when you see our current house and all the projects that haven't been done, actually now since most of you don't go upstairs, it looks about done. But downstairs has taken us, 15 years to more or less get done. But that's because I can blank that stuff out, actually. I don't notice the decor and things if we're having people round. We are not called to entertain people with sophisticated dinner parties. The picture I had in mind here, and I couldn't really find it on the internet, was, do you remember The Good Life and Jerry and Margot and all very posh and everything? And then there was Tom and Barbara with their sort of homegrown, very sort of, actually what we would say now, a very ethical lifestyle. But we don't have to be the Jerry and Margaux. We are called to bless and not impress. One of my best meals that I did once was I cooked flat profiteroles. But actually, do you know, this was in the early days when I didn't even know that strong flour made a difference to things like that. But, you know, flat profiteroles are still pretty good, because what really matters is the chocolate sauce and the cream. But it was an opportunity for a bit of a laugh, and I learned. If we are the body of Christ, then we need to not be trying to put a superficial gloss on who we are. My mum had a little saying, which possibly needs a bit of revision in COVID times, but she always said she wanted her house to be clean enough to be healthy, but dirty enough to be happy. So for people not to feel like they couldn't step over the threshold because it was too perfect, but that it was welcoming. It was usually pretty clean, I have to say. If we want to reach out to neighbours and others in the village, then letting them into the mess and reality of our lives while still focusing and having hope on God can be a powerful testimony. There was a book we studied as mums last year called Ordinary Mum, Extraordinary Mission. And in there it says, use your life in all its glorious chaos. So let's see welcoming people in as an opportunity to bless and not impress. And don't be intimidated by people. Going back to entertaining angels a few years ago, Ron and Mary McLean stayed with us, they lead the Salt and Light group of churches in North America and have done for quite a while. And they're a really lovely couple. She writes songs and has produced some sort of worship CDs. So it was a little sort of, oh my word, you know, we did do quite a bit of cleaning to make sure that the house looked nice for them. But actually having them to stay was a real blessing, and it didn't feel like effort. So in a situation where it could have been intimidating, actually, it did feel like entertaining angels. So that's that quote from the book, letting others into the glorious mess of our lives. And this is our kitchen with its plaster falling off, I've referred to there. We might feel that our capacity is a barrier. And I read an article recently about whether our lives have margins. If you are writing anything sort of school-based or university-based or whatever, you get a sheet of paper, but it's got a margin down the edge, so that little things maybe can be added. What's the situation with our lives? Do we get ourselves so busy that we don't have space for the unexpected? That's quite a challenge for me. I have my time mapped out, I have a plan. It doesn't have to be about food, again. I think welcoming people and having time for them. On Friday afternoon, I went to try and get a tyre replaced. Like I said, we were lending a car to Chris and Steph, and there was one that was a bit dodgy, so I thought I really ought to get it replaced before it causes them a problem. And the garage couldn't do it for an hour or so. So I was going to have some spare time in Whitney. And I rang Steve to tell him what was happening. He was working at home. And I could have got him to pick me up, take me home, and then drive me back a couple of hours later. But I was like, no, it's all right. I had taken a book. I'll go to a coffee shop. I'll read my book. And actually what happened, I not only bumped into Louise briefly, but as I was walking across the Leas, I saw Sue Goodlake. So I stopped and had a chat with Sue. Now, if I had been pursuing my plan, this is what I was going to do on my Friday afternoon, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. And it was obviously really lovely to catch up with her because we haven't seen her much. So hello, Sue, because she's probably going to be listening to this at some point. It was lovely to see you. So think about that as well. Now, in terms of church, how do we become a house of hospitality? I have to say, as individuals, obviously we are the church, and we represent the church whether we like it or not. And particularly for those of us who live in Aston, I think most of you will know, people that you barely know that you come to the fellowship or whatever they might call it. People see us come to the church meetings. People see us mixing with each other. Whatever we may think that they're seeing, they are seeing a lot. So what we do individually is seen as being representative of our church. So in the broadest sense, we need to be welcoming whether food is involved or not. As a church, let's always try and prioritise a stranger who's alone over chatting to someone we know. And it is nice when we can have times of hospitality. Do you remember back in the heady days of February, we had Annie's dedication, and we had about 60 people in the hall. And we worshipped and we prayed and we ate together, and it was great to have several of their friends from further afield and from the village being welcomed in. Obviously, we don't know when we might be able to do that again, but that's a really great way of welcoming people in. And all mucking in together, that sort of thing doesn't happen with one person making an effort. It's all of us joining together. So, what can we do? Obviously, currently, we're a bit more limited. But again, being broader, let's seek to share our lives with other people. Let them in. That's part of hospitality, letting people in, being honest where it's appropriate. At the moment, what I'd say, rather than thinking, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, let's think about doing the little that we can. We can invite someone round at the moment. We'll see later in the week whether that's still possible. Some of us can invite a few people round, depending on our numbers. If we're nervous about that, maybe bake a cake or meet for coffee. And I now have gluten-free flour, so having not been able to make gluten-free apple cakes, I will be making more apple cakes now, because our tree is just shedding apples faster than we can deal with them. And although, obviously, I've said, although hospitality is usually about food, it doesn't have to be. Interesting, though, back on the subject of food, in the Oxford church, Chris has sometimes been invited round for just tea. So another barrier you might feel is, oh, if you invite someone round, how long is it going to take? Is it going to be the whole evening gone and you've got things to do and prepare for school tomorrow and lunch boxes and whatever? They sometimes go to somebody's house for just tea. So they turn up for tea. I don't know if they help with washing up or not, but then they go. So it's a concentrated block of time and everybody knows what is expected, but there's hospitality being offered. Generally, again, just welcoming. Let's try and have time for people. I think many of us have found during lockdown there's been opportunities to stop and chat at a distance to people that we maybe don't often meet, some that we maybe don't really know. There's one or two people in the village that I sort of now know a bit better because of things that have happened in lockdown. Let's not lose that opportunity to give time to people. And when we can, let's be welcoming to people in church and in our homes, making our homes a welcoming place and seeking to bless rather than just impress those we come across.